Chapter 7, Revising and Presenting Your Writing. Grab your guided lecture notes, so download them, have them in front of you. I'm not going to cover everything in here, and you're going to need to be very diligent about figuring out where you have issues. So understand commas and semicolons, do some tests online, look at common errors associated with apostrophes and be able to identify them. Look at subject-verb agreements, split infinitives, double negatives, serial comma, dangling misplaced modifiers. You can Google all these, you can watch YouTube videos, you can do practice, you can look them up. Make sure you understand them. Think about you versus I language, phrasing disagreement, and the document itself as a product. All of these are covered in various places, and you need to make sure that you are comfortable with this. All right, so our agenda is to look at general, specific, and style revision, which are all different ways of looking at something to be revised. Think about giving feedback, proofreading itself, and then design evaluation. What's the big idea? We want you to spend a large portion of your time revising and improving your writing rather than writing. Write quickly and then come back and revise much more slowly and diligently and thoughtfully. So, don't spend a long time. And I know many of you are perfectionists. You are procrastinating perfectionists. Don't spend a long time trying to get the first page perfect. Write it, do the whole thing, and then come back and make it better. You want to prepare for the time when you will give feedback to others in the workplace. So this is not just about you. I know we all focus on ourselves and our final products, but if you're going to be in the workplace, you're going to have a team and you're going to be a manager. You want other people to do things your way, and to get that to happen, you have to train them. Many of you expect that your bosses will onboard you and be able to identify your problems and help you grow. Well, then you have to become that type of person yourself. And that means that you need vocabulary to carefully and clearly and specifically identify issues to help people improve. So be able to point out when they're doing a good job and what's working and why it's working and where they might have issues. And if you can communicate clearly in language that they understand, they're more likely to grow and change and do what you want them to do. Always make it easy for someone to do what you want them to do. Have them, and for yourself, use the feedback from your peer reviews to revise for your portfolio in the class. So every time you get feedback, use that feedback. All right, let's do an overview. There are 4 areas for revision. Content, what you actually have in the document. Style, the organization itself, and then the readability. So these are all different things. I have had some people who have excellent style and poor content or content issues. I have people who have content and style but no clear organizational structure. I have people who have all 3, content, style, and organization, but when I try to read the information, it doesn't make sense. It's hard to parse. And parsing, of course, means that close reading where I try to figure out what goes with what. What does this mean? So let's look at content revisions. Consider what's appropriate for the document. And by that means that you actually have to understand the norms for that document. So what are other people expecting to see when they read this? That means you have to read and understand business documents and think about the audience itself, because obviously content is dependent on audience and the type of document. You want to address the central questions. Who? What? What's going on? When? Where? Why? How? What are all these things answered in the document, and are they clear? Organization means that we look at the document for standard elements. Introduction, body, conclusion. Almost every document has these 3 parts, right? We tell a story. We have the beginning, the middle, the end. We write an email. We have the salutation and opening, the body, and then the closing. So those are standard elements that any document, short or long, will have. So what does it have? The expected documents or elements. And if it's going to have more elements or more parts, look for the parts it's supposed to have and look at the order and whether they make sense. Look at the approach. Do they have a direct approach where they say what this is and why it is this way, and they, are are drawing you a map basically? Or is this indirect, where you start with the reasons first and finally wind around to what a recommendation might be? And consider the pattern. Is that communicated to the reader? Is it appropriate? Does it integrate with the approach itself? Remember the patterns from chapter 6 and be able to address which one would work better, if one would. Okay, style. Do you have a consistent voice that makes sense with the brand that you've developed? So in this case, be aware that a lot of the other things are going to repeat. Does the content make sense for this brand, right? Does the organization make sense for this brand and this voice? Whoever you are, do you usually deal with things this way? The word choice, the grammatical structure. So yes, those repeat. These areas repeat because you're looking for balance and consistency over time in terms of who you are in this situation. So as far as, if you're looking at marketing, is this the type of content and organization and word choice that you typically use as this business entity? Does it make sense for your brand? Does it make sense for your brand as a manager and what you typically communicate with your team? So think about content and style as well, and you would definitely want to look at those protected categories. So if you have a direct report, someone who reports directly to you, that's what a direct report is, who writes and talks about Joan, the overweight clerk in shipping, and how she was promoted, think about the protected categories and be able to address that this would be an issue, right? All of these might be issues. How would you address them in a revision? Well, you probably would take off that description altogether. Joan in shipping was promoted. If you don't know her last name, it's just Joan. But be able to address why you would want that change to be made. Listen, that's not how we refer to someone. It's a protected category. So let's just identify her by her name and where she's located. So you're going to have to give this advice to other people. So readability. How do you check for readability and reader comprehension? Well, be aware that you can use tools like Grammarly. And you can look at sentence length. You can look at the Likert score. And that tells you, what grade would understand what you've written. So you want to think about whether people who are going to work for you can easily understand this. Now, quickly, do you know the literacy rate in Texas? By 2030, Dallas County's population will reach 3.5 million. So an estimated 1/3 of that population will be illiterate. What does that mean? How many illiterate adults will reside in Dallas in the year 2030? Well, if you do some quick math, you're going to discover, 3 million, so 1/3. It's over 1 million people. You want to communicate with many of those people. Some of them will be working for you. Some of them will be your customers. They might, be part of the team that you're working with in B2B marketing. So think about how companies adapt to illiteracy as they sell. Think about how you order fast food. If I order a pizza, what do I see? Well, I usually see a picture of a pizza, and then I can decide what goes on it, right? Because that's what comes up in my app. And if you look at all these menus, you can see that more and more fast food menus give you pictures. They make it easy to pay money to get food, right? The more frustrated someone is, the less likely they are to do, what they're inclined to do. So, make it easy for someone to do what you want them to do. Make it easy for them to buy your product and get what they want. This is part of your decision making and part of your own structure. You don't want to make people feel stupid, but at the same time, you want to make it easy for them to do what they're inclined to do. And even if you can read really well, even if you have an excellent reading level, you know all the words, you have the best words, think about what you want to read and what is easier to read. So when you consider readability, do you want to read A or B? Okay, I agree. I assume you're out there somewhere thinking deep thoughts. I would read B. Why? Because it's not bureaucratic. It's not crammed with long words. It gets to the point. After a 10-month study, our experts have concluded that Hartford Industries' budget shortfalls limit its support for priority projects. Wonderful. That's the main idea. You want it to be easy for people to understand that main idea. So here's an activity, but before we start the activity, think about how you can immediately improve. So a revision recommendation for this slide. Do you have it? Right. It should have numbers. Why? Because this is in time order. First, go to LinkedIn. Second, click on the LinkedIn news and views. Third, find an article, not a video. Fourth, read and analyze it. Fifth, what's one area that would benefit from revision and identify it, and then be prepared to share. Now, I'm not going to require you to do this. The activity itself was to analyze it, but it might be something in a discussion board. So you don't have to do it right now. But think about how quickly you can spot an easy revision that would immediately make something better and help the audience. You know, in this case, you order by time order, do this first and then this second, or by priority level if you're going to number things. So here are 6 areas for specific revision. Format, facts, names, spelling, punctuation, grammar. So think about how bad it is to identify someone by the wrong name, right? If you're praising someone, if you were talking about who went to prison, went to jail, you better get the names right. You better get the facts right too. Think about the formatting itself. You know, it seems easy, but I've had a lot of students go, well, it's not that big a deal that I just didn't, single space, I didn't know how to do it. Well, Google it. Come on, guys, you can do this. You can figure this out, and if it's not important to you, then obviously it's you know, something you can still be judged for, right? You have the ability to look this up and get it right. Okay, sentence length and understanding. So remember that you probably want to revise in terms of thinking about your audience and what people are going to understand. So the longer your sentence is, the less your reader will understand. The American Press Institute did an incredible study in 2013, and they found that at 7 words or less, when you have a correctly phrased sentence, 100% of the people understand it. When we get to 15-word sentences, even if it's correctly written, it makes sense, on first reading, only 90% of the people get it. By the time we hit 25 words or so, it's 50%, and then when we get to 43 words, it's only 10% of the people who read it the first time who immediately understand it. So, what words, or not what words, what sentences do you need your audience to immediately understand? So think about safety. You probably don't want to have really long sentences that talk about safety, right? Because people won't read them and they won't understand them and what they need to do. So short sentences will get your point across. So take a moment, read through this sentence, and break it into 2 sentences. I'll read it aloud, and you can hear how weird this sounds. If we get the contract, we must be ready by June 1 with the necessary personnel and equipment. So with this in mind, a staff meeting, which all group managers are expected to attend, is scheduled for February 12th. Okay. Do you see where we have complete thoughts? All right. If we get the contract, so we have an if-then here, even though the then is implied. If we get the contract, then we must be ready by June 1 with the necessary personnel, P-E-R-S-O-N-N-E-L, and equipment, period. That's a complete thought. Now we start the next sentence, and you would want to change your commas, right? So, comma, with this in mind, comma, a staff meeting, comma, which all group managers are expected to attend, comma, is scheduled for February 12th. I think there's too many commas here, so I would probably take out these, so with this in mind, or just leave so and take out with this in mind, and then put with, which all group managers are expected to attend, put that in parentheses. All right, although we had a frank discussion with Backer's legal staff, we were unable to get them to specify what they would be looking for in an out-of-court settlement, but they gave us a strong impression that they would rather settle out of court. So this is actually a completely correct sentence. However, with that comma and but, you have basically set up a situation in which it might be more effective to use 2 sentences, right? So we had a frank discussion, and we were unable to get them to specify what they would be looking for in an out-of-court settlement period. However, they gave us a strong impression they would rather settle out of court. So that important sentence can be shorter, and probably should be shorter. You know, if you're a lawyer, you want to convey to whoever you're talking to very clearly that this would be an out-of-court settlement rather than a court case. Now, what is a redundancy? So a redundancy is when something is redundant, it is repeated, and it's unnecessarily repeated. So during the course of the next 2 hours, you will see a demonstration of our improved speech recognition software, which will be introduced for the first time in November. Well, I hope that when you introduce something, it is for the first time. So you could delete for the first time and just say will be introduced in November. In grateful appreciation of your patronage, we are pleased to offer you this free gift as a small token gesture of our gratitude. All right, there's too much there, right? A gift in grateful appreciation is fine. So take everything after gift and delete it. Just end the sentence at free gift. The complexity of the module will hamper the ability of the operator in the diagnosis of problems in equipment configuration. Okay, what does this mean? Well, there's some things that are unnecessary here. The complexity of the module will hamper the ability of the operator to diagnose problems. Much better. The purpose of this test of your aptitudes is to help you with the question of the decision of which major to enroll in. So we're looking at unnecessary phrasing, right? If you take a test that is supposed to help you decide on your major, wouldn't you want to say that? To help you with the question of the decision of. That's too much. Take that out. Now, here are some lists. Notice how this has first, second, and third. You could put it all together, or even better, have bullets. All right? Have lists with bullets. And then you can use a colon if you have a complete sentence before that colon. So since there are several problems with the online registration system at Dickinson University, is a complete thought and a complete sentence, you could put a colon there and then have your lists, then have your 3 items, okay? And if you wanted to, you could even separate those items with semicolons. So once you get longer items in a list, you may use semicolons to separate each item. So see how that operates here? It's too much. I would use bullets. But you can, if you choose, use semicolons to separate items in a list, particularly when you have extra commas and dashes. Passive voice. Does this use of the passive voice work? Well, read the whole sentence carefully. The shuttle bus will be driven to local care facilities to provide with shopping opportunities. Is there a missing word there? I think there is. Is it residents? The residents are going to have shopping opportunities? To provide residents with shopping opportunities. Okay, yeah, it doesn't work. The telescope was moved to the Orion system to observe the newly discovered nebula. Well, does that work? Sure, because we don't need to know what moved it. The focus is on the action of it being moved and why it was moved. So in this case, yeah, passive voice does work. It keeps the focus on where we want it to be, not on the mover. So when we're looking at feedback, think about how you react to feedback and how other people do. There's giving feedback, there's receiving feedback, and not flipping out, instead growing. I know this is difficult. Being an adult is difficult. So when you get feedback, you have to think about it. And when you give feedback, you have to consider the person who's getting it. So our source is Thanks for the Feedback. So this is a book that you may want to consult. Be aware that when you're providing feedback, there are no perfect feedback systems. So every system has flaws. It's very difficult to create a system that works 100% all the time. But the best systems, so if I were to ask you, how do we define feedback systems, what the best systems have in common? They promote growth by training employees to want to grow. So what do we see in your future? You're going to become managers. You're going to move up in business, And as such, you are going to end up giving people feedback, and you're going to need to create systems where people feel enabled and feel excited about their own growth and are working towards their own growth. That means you yourself have to model being a good learner. I'm sorry, you have to be an adult. So many people aren't doing it these days, but you get to do it. So you have to learn, you have to be excited about learning, and you have to practice growing as a learner, so making mistakes and moving forward. When you give feedback, you need to balance the receiver's feelings with the needed feedback. So sometimes there are times when there are so many things wrong, but you need to stop at 3 or 4 or 5. Give them something to work on and say, okay, let's look at the first thing that will help you grow as an employee. Notice what's good and say, I'm going to begin with your feedback here. And ask your receivers how to give them feedback. So create a feedback loop that they play a role in. It is okay to talk to people about, their goals and how they grow and change best, and try to give them feedback that fits with who they are. That is a good system, and that might mean that you have 7, 10 direct reports who all get their feedback a little bit differently. Now, you'll probably do an annual review when you become a manager for different people, and so there will be a feedback incorporated in that. But how do you give that feedback? Do you take them out to lunch? Do you do this one at a time? Do some people respond to feedback where they just read it and then you talk about it later? Do some people need you to talk to them first, several weeks before anything gets turned in? Think about that. So when you provide feedback, be aware that rather than just an annual situation of feedback, you probably want to be giving feedback all the time. And that includes appreciation, and this should be specific things and fact-based statements about positive aspects of what they're doing. So we are trying to give you a vocabulary so that you can specifically and directly tell someone what is working. And that developing that vocabulary is critically important. As you probably know, there are bad managers who never give quality feedback. And there are managers who are vague to the point where they're not useful as managers anymore. They are not helpful. You also want to think about whether you are a coach. Do you have growth-oriented responses? Possibly questions that you ask someone to improve a performance. So you sit them down and you say, okay, I'm going to ask you 3 questions, and I need you to think about these questions and give me responses as far as, what you're doing or what you want to do. Evaluation. This might mean that you compare, you compare your own performance or other people's performance to other people out, maybe on your team or out in the industry. This is important too, that evaluative quality. Think about how you introduce it and discuss it and how it is presented. Now, if you if you become a realtor or a car salesman or any kind of sales, you're probably going to encounter this evaluation performance all the time. You will have a leaderboard. So what kind of feedback are we talking about? So appreciation can be as simple as thank you for coming in today. If they came in on a day that they weren't supposed to be there, or they came in early, recognizing something specific. Now, I really like you being able to say nice work on the revised tables for the proposal. You're very clear. That's one of the 10 C's. I like the fact that you can point to something real, something specific that someone has done that is good. That is always, in my opinion, the best feedback. Coaching. So you might ask a specific question. You might sit down with the person to give them feedback, and you might say, okay, I'm going to ask you 3 questions and I need your responses. Why can't you meet deadlines? And then, come up with a plan. Or you can coach them to improve and then talk about it. So be sure you submit an hour before the deadline so John can format the proposal. Can you meet this deadline on Friday? This is where you make it easier for them to do what you want them to do, and then you can praise them for meeting that new deadline and talk about where they've had trouble after they've started to feel some success. And after you've cleared the way for their hurdles, maybe you don't know why they're having trouble meeting those deadlines. Evaluation. You might say something like, this seems like an intern's work. Now, I would be careful with that because someone might feel really offended and angry. Maybe it refers to, their report not being complete. Think about how you present that. Now, you could also do an evaluation where you point them towards improvement, and that's kind of a coaching evaluation in some ways. So that would be the second option, where you point them towards a training course. Think about your own feedback blind spots. So when you give feedback, there's going to be a gap between the self you think you present, so who you are as a manager in the workplace, and the way others see you, or a coworker. Your own behavior is going to be largely invisible to you. I know that seems crazy, but we are our own blind spots, right? You can't see or hear yourself the way you really are and the way you're perceived. So your face itself, sometimes subtle nuances in your eyes and your facial expression are going to convey your mood. You might be largely unaware of the messages your face sends. So when you're disengaged, that look you have is not one that you see on your own face, but other people see it. And they might interpret it differently than you think they would. Think about your tone, your pitch, your cadence. You literally do not hear your voice the way you sound, right? That's one of the reasons we do videos, so we can hear our own voices, because coming out of our heads, it sounds different than it sounds in front of us. And then patterns. You have established behavior patterns that influence how others see you. And frequently, the way you see yourself is based on decades, right? At this point in my life, it's decades. And and so who I am is this layered, complex thing based on decades. And then how other people perceive me is based on a momentary, a semester long, a few years. And so let's say you have consistent late work for a year. What's happened? Well, you lost your apartment and you ended up having to move across town, and you have some money troubles. This is not the way you've always been, but your work is late because you have this long drive, you have a lot of other issues. You still see yourself as the go-getter you were for 10 years before that, but if your whole team turned over around the time that you had this same issue, maybe you switched teams and ended up in this situation, they will see you by the way you've been during your time with them, rather than the person, this complex person that you see yourself as. So that will influence how they perceive you. Okay, take a moment, pause, and go watch the 5-minute TED Talk video, The Secret to Giving Great Feedback. Come back when you're done. Okay, I assume that you watched the video. Let's hope you did. And let's talk about giving feedback and writing. So remember that you want to focus on the product. So what is it that this person is supposed to do? Understand the product. And think about how much feedback is really needed. If you look to this example on the left that's gotten a lot of feedback, there is red ink all over it. People used to say when someone would write in red ink, they bled all over my paper, right? Does that really help the other person improve? Think about the formatting of the feedback. Is this appropriate? So is this what's going to help the person, a lot of writing on their piece of paper, or is there a better way? So, consider that, and then know that if you do make marks directly on the paper, common proofreading marks that you might have learned in English aren't common, aren't understood, and they're not easy to email. So what is better? You can add comments to a document in Google, a Google Doc. You can add comments to a document in Word. You can track changes and actually make changes to the document and show the other person, and they can decide to accept or reject your changes. So these are easy ways to give feedback, and you want to think about whether that's appropriate. So for your boss, you probably don't want to do a track changes. You want to think about what's respectful and what will work best for this situation and how you respond to that person. So 5 steps for evaluation. When you're looking at someone else's work, understand the assignment. And this goes for the workplace as well as your own work. So what are they trying to do? And who is that audience and who are secondary audiences? Assess how well the writing carries out that assignment, and then question assertions. Look for evidence and chain of reasoning. So what is their argument based on? Check those facts. It's critically important when you're in business that you check facts. You don't want to commit libel and defame someone, particularly if you list the wrong name. So be careful and look for errors. You want to make sure that you don't make errors, and you want to be really careful about that. Get systems set up that will help you and others look for errors. There's an activity that you probably will want to do, and I would urge you to do this, follow these steps every time you're looking at a revision. So begin with the long sentences because, you know, obviously the longer the sentence, the less likely someone is to understand. Revise the big words and long phrases. Now, I will tell you that I frequently begin emails by saying, I am writing to tell you that. That's my first draft. Why? Because I'm afraid of blank pages. They scare me. Not like, you know, scary movies scare me, but they bother me. So when I start writing like that, somehow it comes faster and I can write everything I need, and then I go back and revise and delete those unnecessary phrases. You can delete repeated words. What's redundant? You can get rid of cliches, you can cut filler, eliminate slang, and favor precise words. So take a look at this headline. Do you see the error? You see it? It's an apostrophe error. ITS, right? IT apostrophe S is it is, and ITS is possessive. Do you see Donald Trump's error in his subtitled book, Joe Biden and the Democrats' Defense of the Indefensible? So this is what was in The Guardian. I just looked for apostrophe errors and discovered that obviously he meant more than one Democrat. So it should be Democrats with an apostrophe after the S. All right, so in review, go through your lecture notes, make sure that you've addressed all of this. Some of it will really need to be addressed stringently outside of this video. You're going to need to go do it. Look this stuff up. Take some online tests. Make sure you understand the rules. So we are looking at a future with hopefully a lot of really delicious food and maybe more pictures of that food. I hope you have a great day, and someday soon we'll see each other in person and go out and have some coconut rice. Bye.